All right, let's just jump straight into a common concern in the midterm space, but also should be expanded out to your general risk when you think about any kind of investment, and that's saturation. And the reason why this is so top of mind for people is because we've just gone through the Airbnb bust, and some people would be arguing that the Airbnb bust is still happening. And it's also the reason why some people have moved into the midterm space, which is that so much competition flooded into vacation rentals and short-term rentals that people weren't getting their numbers. And so they moved into a midterm model to help offload some of the cleaning costs and some of the other issues and make it easier for themselves. But really, saturation is going to be an issue in any model, whether it's long-term, midterm, or short-term. And the reason why this risk is relevant across all platforms is because while you may or may not know what your competition looks like right now, you have no idea what it's going to look like in the future. So how do you help protect yourself from this? I am extremely bullish about midterm rentals, and I have been since October of 2020, even though I have owned midterm rentals since 2017. And what changed for me in October of 2020 was COVID. COVID had basically started for my part of the country in March of 2020. It had shown up, and then we were seeing a lot of the work from home trends. This was very interesting to me because I felt like it would force bosses' hands that were resistant to remote work, and now they were going to have to. And then what are the implications for when remote work becomes prevalent? What was most interesting to me as a real estate investor and a real estate agent that serves investors was how this affects people and their travel plans and also their moving plans. So where would they be located if they're no longer geographically tethered to their jobs? So that is why I started to get really interested. But then as I started to do more and more research on it, it occurred to me that it's not just remote workers or traveling nurses. It's college students that need to be in this space. It's people potentially getting divorced. It's people checking out cities. More fascinating are the trends that we're seeing in the Millennial and Gen Z cohort, which is basically that they don't want to own things, but they want to have experiences. And if we believe that, then your midterm rental is exactly what they need to live out their dreams. So they don't want to own things. They don't want to own a house. They don't want to own a couch. They don't want to own a car, have a payment, anything that's going to lock them into a certain area, but they do have to live somewhere, and that place has to have furniture. And this is where you come in. It speaks to saturation because even though a lot of people are starting to become aware of the midterm space, moving their rentals into 30 plus day furnished rentals, which means you have more competition, the tenant pool is also growing very quickly and in a very exciting way. Third, and this is going to sound kind of generic, but it is also still true, you are watching these videos. So you're watching my content, you're watching other creators in the space content, and so you're self-educating on how to do midterm rentals or how to do a rental period. And I can tell you from studying this a lot that it definitely puts you ahead of a lot of your competition. The second generalized risk that I think holds true across all the platforms is a fear of tenants and a fear of who's going to rent your place. If they're going to trash it, if they're not going to pay, if they're going to squat. And I can't make you any promises that that's not going to happen, but I guess a couple questions around that are, were you ever a renter? Did you ever trash place? Did you ever overstay? Did you ever have late rent? Did your friends rent? Did they overpay? Did they trash place? Did they have late rent? Know people that own a place and are real estate investors. Have they had bad experiences, tangible, real bad experiences that they've told you about? They have, would they give away their investment or do they regret their investment? Now, about 1% of the people watching these videos or 1% of the investors are going to say, yes, I had a bad experience, or yes, I was a bad tenant and I would never do it again. But that's about 1%. So I just want to say, let's put the risk in context. A good tenant is to set expectations early and often up front, put everything in writing, and be empathetic with them. Now, third and final generalized risk before we get into specific midterm risk is climate change. And I buried this one right in the middle because people love to turn off anything around climate change. Two ways in my mind that you can help mitigate your risk when it comes to climate change. So the first is that Redfin has a climate score at the bottom of any listing for a property that you can look at, and it will tell you what the risk is and how high the consideration is. Now, a lot of places are going to have a risk, but maybe if you find a really high one in an area you want to be, there's another property with a lower climate risk and you should consider that. So that's one, utilize Redfin's tool to gauge climate risk. And number two, don't invest anywhere where insurance is pulling out. So Florida just had a third insurance carrier pull out that will not support Florida anymore because the flooding and the hurricanes are too much. Now, I sympathize with Florida. I recognize that this is a problem, but I'm not investing in Florida anytime soon. All right, now let's talk about risk specific to the midterm rental space, of which there are two that I think you really need to pay attention to. The first is furniture. So how much will it cost you to furnish a place? In this book, it says there's a bunch of tips and tricks, but specifically there's a table of what it will cost you for a furnished rental. Let's say it's a 3-bedroom, it's going to cost you between $9,000 and $11,500. If you are going from a long-term to a midterm, or if you're buying a property and you're considering furnishing that property, take you about 12 to 18 months of income off of that rental to pay back whatever you pay for the furniture. It's a non-risk if you're moving from the short-term space to the midterm space, because you already own the furniture. As a reminder, if you're learning something in this video, please like it. It will help other people find this content. So the cost of the furniture is risk number one. Often in my consulting calls, this is something we evaluate. So if you have a successful long-term rental, but you're considering going into the midterm rental space because you're not liking the long term, or because the midterm rental space is the new sexy thing, a lot of times we'll evaluate whether or not that makes sense for you, and if you'll make enough money to make the furniture investment worth it, and also the fact that it's a little bit more work to be in the midterm space. So actually that's sort of a second one that I wasn't meaning to talk about, but let's just go ahead and talk about it. Midterm rental space, you're probably going to have 3 to 4 turnovers per year, whereas in a typical long term, it's going to be 1 turnover per year. I don't find the turnovers to be that much of a problem or that labor intensive, so I don't really consider it a major negative, especially because you're making anywhere, depending on the rental, between 30 to 60% more on your monthly rent than you would a long-term non-furnished. So number one, furnishing. Number two, having to work a little bit more. And then number three, specific to midterm rentals, is regulation. So what I mean by regulation is if your city has put in any kind of limitation for the length of rental stay that you can do, often we see this in HOAs. So cities typically have nothing written into the code. They have something written into the code to allow for short-term rentals, or they have something written into the code to not allow for short-term rentals. And typically, if they've written something in to not allow for short-term rentals, then the threshold is a 30-day threshold. So usually you're fine in the midterm space, and it's part of the reason why midterms are so popular, is because you're renting for 30 days or more and you're fine with the city. Now, Baltimore is the only city that I know that has a threshold that's longer than 30 days, and it's 90 days. I haven't encountered this anywhere else. However, that said, HOAs sometimes have a threshold of 3 months, 6 months, and those are becoming more and more common. Now, I don't think a 60-day threshold is that big of a deal. I would still rent in a place that had a 2-month threshold. 90 days, you're getting a little tricky. And what you need to evaluate there too is who is paying attention. Are your neighbors really going to know if someone was there for 2.5 months versus 3 months? But as always, you need to think about the risk that you're putting yourself in and what the plan is if the HOA really comes down on you. So you're probably protected on the city level for a 30+ day rental, unless you live in Baltimore. But if you're in a condo or a townhome, you definitely need to make sure that your HOA has it cleared. If you're new to the midterm rental space and you are looking for more resources, I have written 3 books on midterm rentals because it's all I've been doing for the last couple of years. So this book will talk to you specifically about who might want your rental and what the geographic and rental patterns are that are making midterm rentals so popular. This book is like a how-to, so how to set up your listing, which platforms you need to be on, how to vet. Then this final one is called My First Rental Property Workbook, and it's really meant to be a place for you to capture all the information that you need for your rental, and to have like worksheets where you're writing out the best things about your rental so that your listing is done well. It also gives you stats like on tenants. So you might vet a tenant and they might come back with a score, but you don't know if that score is good or not. This has little reference pages so that you know exactly like, okay, this is how other tenants stack up in the space. Generalized guide to midterm rentals, I recommend checking out this video.